Jake Morrison crouched behind the twisted metal remains of what had once been a school bus and watched the alien patrol march through the ruins of downtown Manhattan. The Zephyrians moved with their usual arrogant stride, their blue-scaled bodies gleaming under the harsh artificial lights they had installed throughout the human work zones. 3 generations had passed since they arrived and turned Earth into their personal mining operation, and still they treated humans like cattle. Lucy Carter crawled up beside him, her demolition pack weighing heavy on her shoulders. She had been just a child when the aliens came, but now at 32 she was one of the best explosive experts in the Resistance. Her brown hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes held the same burning hatred that lived in every free human's heart. 2 guards at the depot entrance, she whispered, pointing toward the converted warehouse where the Zephyrians stored their supplies. Ben says he can disable their communications array in 40 seconds, if we create enough noise on the other side of the building. Jake nodded and checked his watch. Ben Rodriguez had been working for NASA before the invasion, designing communication systems for deep space missions. Now he used those same skills to help the Resistance stay one step ahead of their alien overlords. The irony was not lost on any of them that humanity's greatest minds were forced to work as janitors and laborers while secretly planning their freedom. Amy, Walsh's voice crackled through Jake's earpiece. She was positioned 3 blocks away in the ruins of an old radio station, monitoring Zephyrian communications from her makeshift setup. "Jake, you need to hear this," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "I'm picking up something strange on their emergency frequencies." "Can it wait 30 minutes?" Jake asked, watching the patrol disappear around a corner. They had been planning this raid for weeks, and the supply depot contained medical supplies that dozens of sick humans desperately needed. "No, it really can't," Amy replied. "They're talking about something called the Pursuit." "Jake, I think the Zephyrians are running from something." Jake felt his blood run cold. If there was something out there that scared the Zephyrians enough to make them flee across the galaxy, humanity might be facing an even worse enemy. But it also might mean opportunity. "Keep listening," he ordered. "Record everything. We move on the depot in 10 minutes. Lucy checked her explosives one more time while Jake signaled to the other Resistance fighters hidden throughout the rubble. There were 12 of them total, all volunteers who had lost family members to Zephyrian work camps or worse. Each carried weapons they had crafted from salvaged alien technology, crude but effective tools that had served them well in previous raids. The attack began with Ben's electromagnetic pulse device frying the depot's communication systems. The 2 Zephyrian guards turned toward the source of the disruption just as Lucy's charges detonated on the building's far side. The explosion sent chunks of concrete and metal flying through the air, and in the confusion that followed, Jake's team struck. The Resistance fighters moved with practiced efficiency, stunning the guards with captured alien weapons and securing the depot's entrance. Inside, they found exactly what they were looking for: cases of medical supplies, food rations, and most importantly, a Zephyrian communication device that was still functioning. But as they loaded their stolen goods, Amy's voice came through the earpiece again, and this time she sounded terrified. "Jake, you need to get back here now. I've been translating their emergency broadcasts, and what I'm hearing doesn't make sense. The Zephyrians aren't the top of the food chain. There's something called the Architects hunting them, and they've been using enslaved species as shields." Jake felt the world shift beneath his feet. Everything they thought they knew about their situation was wrong. The Zephyrians weren't confident conquerors expanding their empire. They were desperate refugees running for their lives, and they had turned humanity into unwitting cannon fodder for a war they didn't even know was being fought. "How long do we have?" he asked, helping Lucy carry a case of medical supplies toward their escape route. "I don't know," Amy replied. "But Jake, there's something else. The broadcasts mention coordinates, jump points, places where they're planning to run next. If we could somehow contact these architects, maybe we could make a deal." The idea was insane, but Jake had learned that insane ideas were often the only ones that worked when you were fighting for survival against impossible odds. As they retreated through the ruins of the city where he had grown up, he began to formulate a plan that would either free humanity or destroy them all. The supply raid had been successful, but it had also revealed a truth that changed everything. Humanity wasn't just fighting for freedom from one alien oppressor. They were caught in the middle of a galactic war they didn't understand, being used as expendable soldiers by cowards who had enslaved them to save themselves. But knowledge was power, and now that they knew the truth, Jake Morrison was determined to use it. The Zephyrians had made a fatal mistake in underestimating human intelligence and resourcefulness. They were about to learn that their former slaves had plans of their own. Dr. Helen Price pressed her eye against the microscope and tried to ignore the Zephyrian overseer breathing down her neck. For the past 6 months, she had been forced to work in their research facility, analyzing the power cores that drove their massive ships. The aliens thought they were using her doctorate in theoretical physics to make their technology more efficient. But Helen had her own agenda. Hidden within the quantum structure of every Zephyrian power core was something that didn't belong. It was a frequency pattern so subtle that the aliens themselves seemed unaware of it. But Helen's trained eye had spotted the anomaly weeks ago. The pattern was too complex to be natural and too sophisticated to be Zephyrian technology. Someone else had put it there. "Worker Price," the overseer hissed through his translator device. "Your productivity has decreased by 0.7% this week. Explain." Helen looked up at the creature's cold yellow eyes and forced herself to remain calm. "I'm conducting deeper analysis to improve long-term efficiency," she lied smoothly. "Sometimes slower work produces better results." The overseer made a note on his datapad and moved on to terrorize another human worker. Helen returned to her microscope, but her mind was racing. If her theory was correct, the frequency pattern was some kind of tracking beacon, and that meant the Zephyrians were being followed by whoever had placed it there. Meanwhile, across the city, Jake Morrison was having his own breakthrough. The Resistance had managed to capture Commander Vexthal during a raid on a Zephyrian transport, and after 2 days of careful interrogation, the alien was finally starting to talk. "You humans understand nothing," Vexthal said, his scaled face twisted with what might have been fear or anger. "You think we came to your world by choice, but we are refugees just as you are slaves." Lucy Carter leaned forward in her chair, her demolition expertise giving her a talent for extracting information through intimidation. "Refugees from what?" she demanded. The Zephyrian's translator crackled as he spoke. "From the architects. They have been hunting my people for thousands of your years, destroying every world we try to make our home. We enslave other species because we need soldiers, shields, anything to slow them down." Ben Rodriguez looked up from his equipment where he was recording the conversation. "You're using us as cannon fodder." "Yes," Vexthal admitted without shame. "Better that you die fighting our enemies than that we face them alone. The architects see all organic life as a disease to be cured. They will not stop until every living thing in this galaxy is dead." Jake felt anger burning in his chest, but he forced himself to think strategically. "How do they track you? How do they always know where to find you?" For the first time, genuine confusion crossed the aliens' features. "They simply appear. Our best scientists believe they can detect our technology signatures across vast distances, but we have never understood how." That evening, Jake met with his core team in the abandoned subway tunnel they used as their headquarters. Amy Walsh had been monitoring Zephyrian communications all day, and her findings supported everything Vexthal had told them. "The broadcasts are definitely from a species under pressure," Amy reported, her laptop displaying translated alien text. "They're talking about evacuation procedures, fallback positions, contingency plans. These aren't the communications of confident conquerors." Helen Price had managed to slip away from her work detail and join them for the meeting. When she heard what Vexthal had revealed, her own discoveries suddenly made perfect sense. "The frequency pattern in their power cores," she said excitedly. "It's not Zephyrian technology at all. Someone else put it there, probably these architects. Every ship they build, Every facility they construct, it's all been tagged with tracking devices they don't even know exist. The implications hit everyone at the same time. The Zephyrians weren't just running from the architects. They were leading them directly to every world they conquered, including Earth. So these architects already know we're here, Jake said grimly. The question is whether they're planning to destroy us along with our captors, or if there's some way to contact them and explain our situation. Carlos Martinez, who had been quiet until now, spoke up from his corner of the tunnel. As an engineer, he had been reverse engineering Zephyrian technology for months, trying to find weaknesses the resistance could exploit. If Helen is right about the frequency patterns, maybe we could modify one to send our own signal. Instead of just tracking, we could use it to communicate. That's incredibly dangerous, Amy warned. If we're wrong about their intentions, we'd be calling down destruction on the entire planet. And if we do nothing, we stay slaves forever, Lucy countered. At least this gives us a chance to fight for real freedom instead of just staging raids and hoping for the best. Jake looked around at his team, these brave humans who had risked everything to resist their oppressors. They were scientists and soldiers, engineers, and demolition experts, but they all shared the same desperate hope for liberty. The choice before them was terrible but clear: remain slaves to alien cowards who were using them as shields, or take an enormous gamble that might either free them or destroy them completely. Helen, how long would it take you to modify one of their communication devices? He asked. With Carlos helping me, maybe 2 weeks if we can get access to a major transmitter. But Jake, we'd need enormous amounts of power to reach across interstellar space. We'd have to tap into one of their main facilities. The command ship, Ben said suddenly. It's got the biggest reactor in the system, and it's where they coordinate all their operations. If we're going to send a message that reaches the architects, that's our best chance. Jake nodded slowly. They were talking about infiltrating the most heavily defended Zephyrian installation in the solar system, modifying alien technology they barely understood, and sending a message to entities that might respond by destroying Earth. It was suicide disguised as a rescue mission, but it was also their only real hope for freedom. For 3 generations, humanity had endured slavery and waited for salvation that never came. Now they had a chance to save themselves if they were brave enough to take it. Carlos Martinez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he and Helen Price worked frantically to assemble their modified transmitter in the cramped maintenance tunnel beneath the Zephyrian command ship. They had been building the device for 2 weeks using salvaged alien components, reverse engineering technology that was centuries ahead of anything humans had ever created. The power coupling is almost ready, Carlos whispered, his hands steady despite the enormous pressure they were under. Before the invasion, he had been designing experimental aircraft engines, but now he was humanity's best hope for creating a communication device that could reach across the stars. Helen connected the final frequency modulator to the transmitter's core, her heart pounding as she thought about what they were attempting. If my calculations are right, this should piggyback our signal onto their tracking beacon network. The architects will receive our message along with the Zephyrian location data. Above them, Lisa Thompson and her infiltration team were fighting their way through the command ship's security systems. Lisa had been a special forces operator before the aliens arrived, and her experience in behind enemy lines operations was keeping them alive as they created diversions to mask the transmission team's work. Ryan Cooper, her computer specialist, had managed to hack into the ship's internal communication systems and was feeding false security reports to the Zephyrian guards. Multiple breaches reported on Deck 7, he announced through his COM device, sending alien security forces running toward empty corridors while the real infiltrators moved through other sections of the ship. Danny Sullivan, the team's combat medic, was treating wounded resistance fighters while monitoring their escape routes. His medical training had proved invaluable during previous raids, and tonight he was working overtime to keep everyone alive and mobile. The plan had seemed impossible when Jake first proposed it, but somehow they had made it this far. Across Earth, human resistance cells were staging coordinated attacks on Zephyrian facilities. creating chaos that drew attention away from the command ship operation. It was the largest resistance action in human history, and everything depended on Helen and Carlos completing their work before the aliens realized what was really happening. "Jake, we're getting heavy resistance on the upper decks," Lisa reported through the comm system. "How much more time do you need?" Jake Morrison pressed himself against the tunnel wall as footsteps echoed overhead. He was leading the security team that protected Helen and Carlos while they worked, and every minute that passed increased the chance of discovery. "Helen, how much longer?" 5 minutes to finish the modifications, then another 10 to establish the connection and send the message, Helen replied, her hands never stopping their delicate work on the transmitter components. The footsteps overhead grew louder, and Jake could hear Zephyrian voices shouting orders in their harsh alien language. Amy Walsh's voice crackled through his earpiece from her position monitoring alien communications. "Jake, they know something is wrong. Security alerts are going out across the entire ship." "Ben, can you give us more time?" Jake asked into his comm device. Ben Rodriguez was positioned near the ship's main computer core, using his engineering skills to create false sensor readings and redirect security patrols. "I can maybe buy you another 10 minutes before they trace the source of the disruptions," he replied, his fingers flying across the alien control interfaces. Helen connected the last component and looked up at Carlos with desperate hope in her eyes. "It's ready. Now we need to tap into their main reactor to get enough power for interstellar transmission." Carlos had already prepared the power connections, thick cables that would carry enormous amounts of energy from the ship's central reactor to their makeshift transmitter. "On my mark," he said, his hand hovering over the activation switch. Above them, the sound of fighting grew closer. Lisa's team was running out of ammunition and places to retreat, and the Zephyrian security forces were closing in on all sides. But Jake knew they couldn't abort now. This was humanity's only chance to contact the architects and explain their situation. "Do it," he ordered. Carlos threw the switch, and the transmitter came alive with crackling energy. Helen's modified frequency pattern began broadcasting into space, carrying with it humanity's desperate message to beings they had never seen but hoped might understand their plight. "Unknown entities called architects," Helen spoke into the transmitters. Microphone, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We are humans, enslaved by the Zephyrians you hunt. We are not your enemies. We are prisoners forced to fight in a war we did not choose. Give us the chance to prove we are worthy of freedom." The message repeated automatically, broadcasting on multiple frequencies as Helen had programmed it to do. But even as their desperate plea traveled through space, Zephyrian security forces were breaking through the barriers that protected them. "They found us," Jake shouted, raising his weapon as alien soldiers poured into the tunnel. "Everyone fall back to secondary positions." The fighting was vicious and close quarters, with human resistance fighters using their superior knowledge of the ship's layout to outmaneuver their alien pursuers. Lisa Thompson's team joined the battle, their military training evident as they coordinated defensive positions and covering fire. But the Zephyrians had overwhelming numbers and superior equipment. One by one, the human fighters were forced to retreat deeper into the ship's maintenance areas, carrying their precious transmitter and hoping their message had reached its intended recipients. "Helen, did it work?" Jake asked as they took cover behind a massive conduit junction. Helen checked her equipment with shaking hands. "The signal transmitted successfully, but I have no way of knowing if anyone received it or if they'll respond. We could be waiting days or weeks for an answer. Or they could just destroy Earth," Lucy Carter added grimly, reloading her weapon, as Zephyrian voices echoed through the tunnels behind them. But even as the resistance fighters prepared for what might be their final battle, something was happening far above Earth that none of them could have expected. The message had indeed been received, and the response was already on its way. The architects had been watching the Zephyrian expansion for years, cataloging their crimes and planning their judgment, but humanity's transmission had given them something they had never encountered before. A plea for justice from victims rather than conquerors, a request for the chance to prove worth rather than a demand for mercy or protection. The answer would come sooner than anyone imagined, and it would change everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the galaxy. But first, Jake Morrison and his brave resistance fighters had to survive long enough to see what their desperate gamble had accomplished. As alien security forces closed in around them, the humans prepared to fight to the last breath, not knowing that their message had already begun to tip the balance of a war that had raged across the stars for millennia. The first sign that something had changed came 3 days after the transmission, when every Zephyrian on Earth suddenly stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky. Jake Morrison was hiding in the ruins of Central Park with the surviving members of his team when he saw the alien guards abandon their posts and stare at the heavens with what could only be described as terror. Then the sky began to burn. A point of crystalline light appeared directly above Manhattan, growing brighter and more complex by the second. It wasn't a ship or any kind of technology Jake could understand. It was like watching pure mathematics take physical form. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, but somehow conveyed meaning beyond human comprehension. "What is that thing?" Lucy Carter whispered, her demolition expertise useless against something that seemed to exist beyond the normal rules of physics. The answer came not through words, but through direct mental contact. Jake felt a presence touch his mind, ancient and vast and utterly alien, yet somehow not hostile. When it spoke, its voice resonated inside his skull with the weight of cosmic authority. "I am the Surveyor," the entity announced, its thoughts reaching every human on Earth simultaneously. "I represent the architects, those who maintain the balance between order and chaos across the galaxy. Your message has been received and evaluated." Helen Price, who had been unconscious since their escape from the command ship, suddenly sat up with her eyes wide. The Surveyor's mental touch had awakened something in her brilliant mind, downloading concepts and knowledge that human science had never imagined possible. "They're not what we thought?" she gasped, her voice filled with wonder and fear. "The architects aren't destroyers, they're gardeners. They've been fighting a war against species that consume everything in their path, turning entire star systems into lifeless husks." The Surveyor's presence intensified, and Jake felt his consciousness expand to encompass truths that staggered him. The Zephyrians were just one example of what the architects called the consumption organic life forms that spread like cancer through the galaxy, enslaving or destroying every other species they encountered in their endless hunger for resources and power. "For millions of years, we have cleansed infected sectors," the Surveyor continued, its mental voice carrying images of dead worlds and extinct civilizations. "Every species we have encountered has followed the same pattern: expansion, consumption, destruction, until now." Jake found himself able to respond directly to the entity's thoughts. "We're different?" "Your message was unprecedented," the Surveyor replied. "No enslaved species has ever offered to prove their worth rather than beg for salvation. No conquered people has ever sought to demonstrate value rather than demand mercy. This suggests possibilities we had not considered." Around them, the crystalline manifestation grew larger and more complex, its geometric patterns shifting through dimensions that human eyes could barely perceive. But somehow Jake could sense the vast intelligence behind it, studying humanity with the patience of a being that had existed since the galaxy was young. "What do you want from us?" Helen asked, her enhanced understanding allowing her to communicate more clearly with the Surveyor. "A demonstration," came the reply. "You claim to be worthy of freedom, capable of growth beyond the pattern of consumption that defines your oppressors. We will grant you 1 standard galactic year to prove this claim by freeing yourselves without our direct intervention." Sophie Williams, a tech genius who had been captured during the command ship raid but somehow escaped during the confusion, stepped forward from where she had been hiding in the rubble. "What happens if we succeed?" "Freedom and equality among the civilized species of the galaxy," the Surveyor answered. "Knowledge, technology, and a place in the cosmic community as partners rather than subjects." "And if we fail?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Extinction alongside your oppressors," the entity replied without emotion. The pattern of consumption cannot be allowed to continue spreading. But even as the surveyor delivered this ultimatum, it began sharing something extraordinary with selected humans across the planet. Jake felt knowledge flooding into his mind, not weapons or ship designs, but fundamental principles of energy manipulation and space-time physics that human understanding had never approached. Helen gasped as equations and theories beyond her wildest imagination downloaded directly into her consciousness. Sophie Williams found herself understanding the basic principles of stellar engineering and gravity manipulation. Across Earth, other brilliant humans were receiving similar gifts, the foundation of knowledge needed to level the playing field against their alien oppressors. This is not charity, the surveyor warned. These principles exist within your own scientific framework, but you lack the perspective to see them. We merely illuminate what your species is capable of discovering. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't being given alien technology. They were being shown how to unlock the potential of their own science, how to take the next evolutionary step that would transform them from primitive slaves into equals of their galactic neighbors. But even as hope bloomed in Jake's heart, alerts began sounding across the Zephyrian installations. The aliens had realized what was happening, and their response was swift and brutal. If the architects were now aware of Earth's location, the Zephyrians had nothing left to lose by stripping the planet bare and fleeing to their next hiding place. There, beginning the final harvest, Amy Walsh reported through her monitoring equipment, her voice tight with horror. Every Zephyrian facility is going to maximum extraction mode. They're planning to take everything they can carry and abandon Earth. Within the month, the surveyor's presence began to fade as its crystalline manifestation dissolved back into pure energy. Your test begins now, it announced. 1 year to prove that humanity can rise above the pattern of consumption and become something greater. Use the knowledge wisely. As the entity vanished, leaving only empty sky where the geometric patterns had blazed, Jake Morrison looked around at his team and saw the same determination burning in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. The architects had given them a chance, but it would be up to humanity to seize it. The real war was about to begin, and this time humans would fight not as slaves seeking freedom, but as a species proving their right to exist among the stars. They had 1 year to defeat an enemy that had oppressed them for generations, using knowledge they barely understood to accomplish the impossible. But for the first time since the Zephyrians arrived, Jake Morrison truly believed they could win. 6 months into the war, Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance, humanity's first energy-enhanced starship, and watched plasma fire light up the space between Earth and Mars. The battle for the lunar mining stations had been raging for 3 days, and finally the tide was turning in humanity's favor. General Morrison, as he was now known to the United Human Resistance, commanded a fleet that would have been impossible to imagine just months earlier. Using the knowledge the surveyor had shared, human scientists had revolutionized their understanding of physics and engineering in ways that normally would have taken centuries. Helen Price had become the chief architect of humanity's new weapons technology, creating plasma cannons that could punch through Zephyrian shields and gravity, manipulators that could crush entire alien warships. Her understanding of energy manipulation had grown exponentially as she applied architect principles to human engineering. Helen, status report on the Luna assault, Jake requested through the ship's communication system. Colonel Hayes has secured mining stations 7 through 12, Helen replied from her position at the science station. The gravity bombs are performing exactly as calculated. We're tearing their defensive formations apart from the inside. Patricia Hayes had been a Marine colonel before the invasion, and now she led the ground assault teams that were reclaiming human territory across the solar system. Her forces moved with precision and devastating effectiveness, using advanced weapons that made Zephyrian armor look like paper on the main screen. Jake watched as human fighters engaged Zephyrian interceptors in deadly aerial combat. The enemy ships were still faster and more maneuverable, but human pilots had learned to compensate with superior tactics and weapons that could adapt to alien countermeasures. Commander Kevin Blake's voice, crackled through the communication system from his position leading the fighter wing. "General Morrison, we've broken through their outer defensive line, requesting permission to proceed to the primary targets." "Granted," Jake replied, feeling pride swell in his chest as he watched human ships burn through space with stolen stellar. "Fire. Take out their command centers, but remember, we need some of those facilities intact for our own use." The war had been brutal and costly beyond anything humanity had ever experienced. Entire cities had been destroyed in the fighting, and millions of humans had died as the Zephyrians fought desperately to maintain their grip on Earth. But for every human life lost, 10 alien oppressors paid the price Sophie Williams had taken. The surveyor's knowledge of stellar manipulation and created weapons that harnessed the power of stars themselves. Her engineering teams were now capable of building ships that could match Zephyrian speed and firepower, vessels that burned with controlled fusion reactions and moved through space like living flames. "Sophie, how are the new ship designs performing?" Jake asked, turning to where she worked at her engineering station. "Beyond our best projections," Sophie replied, her eyes bright with the joy of scientific discovery. "We've not just matched Zephyrian technology, we've exceeded it. Our ships are more efficient, more powerful, and most importantly, they can't be tracked by their beacon technology." That last point was crucial to humanity's strategy. While the Zephyrians were still unknowingly broadcasting their locations, to the architects through their own technology, human ships had been designed from the ground up to be undetectable by the tracking systems their former oppressors relied upon. The battle for Mars had been a turning point. When human forces led by Jake personally assaulted the main Zephyrian base on the Red Planet, they had captured not just territory but an enormous amount of alien technology and intelligence. Most importantly, they had taken prisoners who revealed the location of the Zephyrian evacuation fleet. "General, we're receiving reports from the outer system," Amy Walsh announced from her communications post. "Captain Stone's reconnaissance mission has located the main enemy fleet near Jupiter. They're preparing for a hyperspace jump." Rachel Stone had been a navigator on commercial spacecraft before becoming one of humanity's most skilled deep space pilots. Her mission to track down the fleeing Zephyrians was perhaps the most important assignment of the entire war. If the aliens escaped to warn other collective forces, they would return with overwhelming numbers that could crush human resistance forever. "How long before they can jump?" Jake demanded. 48 hours maximum, Rachel reported through the long-range communication link. "They're loading their ships with everything they can carry, but their evacuation is chaotic. If we hit them now, we can catch them while they're disorganized." Jake made the decision that would determine humanity's fate. "All ships prepare for hyperspace jump to Jupiter. This is our chance to end the war before the deadline expires." The final battle would take place in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, where the Zephyrian evacuation fleet was desperately trying to escape with the resources they had stolen from Earth. It was the largest concentration of alien forces in the solar system, and defeating them would require everything humanity had learned about warfare and technology over the past year. But Jake Morrison was no longer the desperate resistance fighter who had crouched in the ruins of Manhattan hoping for a miracle. He was the leader of a species that had transformed itself from slaves into warriors, from victims into conquerors. The knowledge the architects had shared hadn't just given humans better weapons, it had shown them what they were truly capable of achieving. "Helen, begin charging the stellar manipulation device," he ordered. "Sophie, bring all ships to full combat readiness. We're going to show the Zephyrians what happens when they underestimate human determination." The Defiance and her sister ships began their jump toward the outer system, their hulls glowing with contained stellar fire. Behind them, Earth was no longer a slave world, but the birthplace of a species that had earned its freedom through courage, intelligence, and an absolute refusal to surrender. The war that had begun with desperate raids and stolen supplies was about to end with humanity proving they deserved their place among the stars. The Zephyrians had taught them to fight by oppressing them for generations, but now those same oppressors were about to learn that their former slaves had become their equals in every way that mattered. In the darkness between the worlds. Human ships burned like falling stars as they raced toward their destiny and the final confrontation that would determine whether humanity would survive to see true freedom or die trying to achieve it. The final battle erupted in the asteroid belt with a fury that lit up the darkness between worlds. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance as human ships clashed with the desperate Zephyrian evacuation fleet, their hulls blazing with stolen stellar fire as they fought for the freedom of their species. The alien fleet was massive, hundreds of ships loaded with the wealth they had stripped from Earth over 3 generations of slavery. But they were disorganized and panicked, trying to defend their stolen goods while preparing to flee to hyperspace. The humans hit them like a hammer blow, coordinated and focused after a year of constant warfare. Commander Kevin Blake led the human fighter squadrons in a devastating assault on the Zephyrian escort vessels, his pilots moving with precision that their alien opponents couldn't match. Defiance, this is Blake. We've broken through their fighter screen. The capital ships are exposed. Jake watched the tactical display as human dreadnoughts moved into attack formation, their plasma cannons charging for the killing blow. Colonel Patricia Hayes was leading ground assault teams against the massive Zephyrian mining station that served as the fleet's command center, her Marines fighting through alien defenders with weapons that burned through enemy armor like paper. Helen, status on the stellar device? Jake called to Dr. Price, who was monitoring the most powerful weapon humanity had ever created. Charging to full capacity, Helen replied, her hands dancing across controls that managed energies equivalent to a small star. Sophie's calculations show we can create a controlled solar flare that will disable their entire fleet without destroying the asteroid belt. Sophie Williams had spent months perfecting the stellar manipulation technology, learning to harness the power of stars themselves for humanity's use. Her engineering teams had built weapons that the Zephyrians couldn't understand, much less defend against, turning human desperation into technological superiority. The battle reached its climax when the Zephyrian flagship, a massive vessel carrying their high command, attempted to break free from the human fleet and reach the hyperspace jump point. Jake ordered the Defiance to intercept, knowing that if the alien leaders escaped, they would return with reinforcements that could overwhelm Earth's defenders. All ships, focus fire on the flagship, he commanded, watching as human plasma cannons converged on the enemy vessel. We end this now. But even as human weapons tore through Zephyrian shields, Helen was implementing the final phase of her plan. Every beacon and power core they had captured over the past year had been modified to create a massive feedback loop that would turn the alien technology against itself. The Zephyrians had enslaved humanity using their superior science, but now, that same science would destroy them. Helen, initiate the cascade, Jake ordered. Dr. Price activated the beacon network, and across the Zephyrian fleet, power cores began to overload in chains of brilliant light. Enemy ships exploded one after another as their own technology turned against them, systems designed to track and control suddenly becoming instruments of destruction. The alien flagship tried desperately to escape the cascade effect. But Sophie Williams was ready with humanity's greatest achievement. The stellar manipulation device reached full charge, and with careful precision, she directed its power toward the sun itself. A controlled solar flare erupted from the star that had given birth to human civilization, a tongue of stellar fire that swept through the asteroid belt with devastating effect. The remaining Zephyrian ships were caught in the solar storm, their systems overwhelmed by energies they had never learned to control. As alien vessels burned like falling stars, their hulls cracking under the pressure of stellar winds, Jake Morrison felt a presence touch his mind once again. The surveyor had returned to witness humanity's victory, and its ancient consciousness carried approval that resonated through every human soul. You have exceeded our expectations, the architect entity announced, its thoughts reaching across the solar system to every human who had fought for freedom. Not only have you defeated your oppressors, but you have demonstrated innovation and restraint that mark true civilization. The crystalline manifestation appeared once more above the battlefield, its geometric patterns more complex and beautiful. than before. Humanity has proven itself worthy of joining the galactic community not as subjects or clients, but as equals with unlimited potential. Jake looked around his bridge at the humans who had made this victory possible. Helen Price, whose scientific genius had unlocked the secrets of stellar manipulation. Sophie Williams, whose engineering brilliance had created weapons beyond alien comprehension. Kevin Blake, Patricia Hayes, Rachel Stone, and all the others who had fought and died to prove that humanity deserved its freedom. What happens now? Jake asked the surveyor, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Now you reclaim your world and reach for the stars, the entity replied. The knowledge we have shared is only the beginning. Your species has demonstrated the capacity for growth that we have waited millennia to find. The galaxy awaits your contributions. As the last Zephyrian ships fell silent and dead, floating wreckage in the asteroid belt, human vessels began the journey home to Earth, but they were no longer returning as desperate rebels or escaped slaves. They were coming home as conquerors who had burned their oppressors away like the light of a vengeful sun. The war was over, and humanity had won not through luck or alien charity, but through their own courage, intelligence, and absolute refusal to accept defeat. 3 generations of slavery had ended with a victory that proved humans belonged among the stars as equals to any species in the galaxy. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance as they approached Earth, watching human ships spread out to reclaim their solar system. The planet below was beginning to heal, its cities rising from the ruins as free people rebuilt what their oppressors had destroyed, but the real prize wasn't the recovery of Earth or even the defeat of the Zephyrians. It was the knowledge that humanity had earned its place in the cosmic community through their own efforts, proving they could evolve beyond the pattern of consumption that had doomed so many other species. In the years that followed, human ships would venture beyond the solar system not as conquerors or refugees, but as explorers and partners in a galactic civilization. They would carry with them the memory of their long slavery and the knowledge that freedom was something that had to be earned and defended. The Zephyrians had thought they were using humans as expendable shields in their war against the architects. Instead, they had forged a species that burned with stellar fire and refused to bow to any oppressor. Humanity's revenge had indeed burned like a star, consuming their enemies and lighting the way to a future among the galaxies.